Where does this podcast journey take you to right now here on Alex Garrett Podcasting? It feels like I have to follow that star, that light, to Bethpage, New York right now, where, would you believe this? A family in mourning got told by a neighbor in Bethpage, take your Christmas lights down. It's Valentine's Day. First of all, people can have their lights up however long they want. They don't need a reason. They don't need a rhyme. They just can have them up. Especially in this time where we're all dealing with the pandemic. We're dealing with some other situations here in this country. We're still dealing with unemployment. We're dealing with businesses locked down. People can have their damn lights on without being questioned in February. But then you look at the story of Sarah Pascucci and her family about why they still have the lights on. Unfortunately, her father and aunt have died from COVID-19. Unfortunately, her entire family got sick on Christmas Eve and lost 2 family members to COVID-19, her aunt and her father, who always loved decorating the house for Christmas. So, Anonymous Grinch, whoever you are, why? Why tear down a neighbor? What happened to maybe even honoring what Joe Biden said multiple times in his inauguration speech, unity? If they want the lights on, they should be able to have them on in peace, not be hurt by them, especially by fellow, by someone anonymous who hides behind the Anon token or handle, whatever you want to say. Keep those lights on this February. I remember last year during the COVID crisis when it first started in March, we had radio stations playing Christmas music. We had people keeping the lights up because of the devastation that was starting to come to our country. And I even said last January, keep the lights on. Follow that star to the east. Light the lights for people. Light the way for those who are lost, especially this time around. And then there's another story. So I am in full support of Sarah Pascucci. I am in full support of anyone that wants to keep their lights on past a certain date. Christmas doesn't end on Christmas Day. It keeps going and going in our hearts. If we just let it be that way, we can keep Christmas all year round. And while many tried to jam up and gum up the stock market last week, of course, with the whole GameStop and AMC thing, there are actually companies that are having George Bailey, remember It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey moments. Take a listen.
George, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. Who's gonna come, Daddy? Who, Daddy? Come in, Uncle Billy. Everybody in here.
George! George! Isn't it wonderful? So many friends. Mary did it, George. Mary did it. She told some people you were in trouble with it. They scattered all over town collecting money.
And guess what? As people were gumming up the stock market, as there's debate about whether to bring COVID relief to Americans and continuing to pump us up with money and how much money we should get, we are seeing the private sector raising money for themselves. Touchcast, a startup in New York, raising $55 million, doing it their own way to provide reality-based virtual events. We are being told we need relief, we need relief, we need relief. Well, if we do, then why are some companies taking it upon themselves to raise the money themselves? If we need relief so badly, why am I seeing stories like this? And they're not the only one. I scrolled down. Bizabo, another one. $138 million raised. So why is the government continually debating what to give us, and fellow Americans around us are raising their own money and giving that strength? Why aren't we just saying, hey, you know what, private sector, chip in more? Okay, the Biden administration got a contract for more at-home tests for COVID. That's great. But why stop the private sector there? Instead of having these debates, reach out to the private sector. Say, hey, how can you help Americans right now? We see you're raising $55 million. We see you're raising $138 million. We see you're raising $125 million if you're hoping, HOPIN. If the private sector, if these startups, if these companies are raising money themselves, why can't we just empower that money raising to go into our, to go to us as well? Hey, we see you're raising all this money while we're debating on a Senate floor what to do next. Stop debating, start getting these companies involved, and start praising the fact that people are finding ways to make their companies work in this time. For a country where people are saying, oh, there's not enough money. People are out of business, and they are, okay? There's no doubt about that. But, and again, I'm not a stonks guy or a stocks guy. I still say we should be praising those that are raising money like this. I still say that if we're seeing the private sector raise all this money, we should, as a country, stop debating how much we get individually and start saying, hey, private sector, what can you do to help us get more people? We see you're raising this money. We see your startup is successful. What can you do to help us? What can you do? And instead of paying attention to the stock market being jammed up, let's focus on those that are actually doing things in this country right now, raising money for their companies. Having their George Barely moments where people do want to invest. Yes, people are investing in these companies. They're not getting $55 million out of nowhere. Touchcast isn't. They're literally getting investors involved in a pandemic. It sounds like a far-fetched thought, doesn't it? Like, I thought we had no money. I thought people were out of... And again, I'm not diminishing it. But let's say Joe Biden or the Biden administration reaches out to a company like Touchcast here in New York, which developed a platform aimed at companies to produce lifelike virtual conferences and other events, picked up funding of $55 million that Edo Segal, CEO, will use to build out its services and teams after being overrun by demand in wake of COVID-19. Accenture Ventures, the investment arm of this, with Alexander Capital Ventures, Saatchi Invest, Ronald Lauder, and other unnamed investors are also participating. This was for a while self-funded. Then Edo Segal got people involved. So you have all these companies investing in this one, for example, $55 million company. It's time to say, hey, let's do something. When you're getting this funding, when you're getting your company up and off the ground running in a pandemic, and you see millions are unemployed, I would, if I were even New York City, reach out and say, hey, we see you have this startup. We see you have this successful startup in a pandemic. How can you help fellow New Yorkers, Touchcast? How can you help hire Edo Segal to build out your team and service? How can you help people get out of the house and hired in a safe manner, of course? But why are we every time we hear businesses are successful or businesses should be open, people are being demonized for keeping their business open. Why? You lament unemployment, but you're okay with the business being closed? What sense does that make, America? It makes no sense at all. I'm fired up because I want to see people back in work. I want to see people back on the streets. I don't want to hear debates of COVID-19 funding over and over again. I want to hear that we're getting results, that the private sector is being partnered with, not thrown to the side. That's what I want to hear here at Alex Garrett Podcasting. It's tiring. Well, we don't know when the relief package, we don't know how much it's going to be. Meanwhile, under our noses, while these people are cramming the stocks, that gets more attention. While they're protesting on New York Stock Exchange, that gets attention. Hey, there are startups getting investors involved. And what are we doing? Why are there Americans still, unemployed if these big businesses, if these startups are making so much capital? And I'm going to talk to someone in my next podcast about this, about conscious capitalism. This is what I'm feeling. Capitalism in the community. You see a startup making $55 million. You say, hey, with that money, what can you do with that startup? What can you do to bring on millions that are unemployed or a sector that is unemployed? All these companies that are making money right now obviously have a niche. Why aren't we asking them to hire people that are unemployed? Why aren't we? Why aren't we doing capitalism in the community? Why aren't leaders, instead of demonizing businesses for being open, telling these people, yes, be open. We want people to have jobs. You cannot say you want the economic valve turned open and yet still keep us closed. You cannot say you want this economic valve open and yet not reach out to the private sector to do something to bring people back into the fold. You cannot do that. It makes no sense in my mind. It feels hypocritical to say you want the economics to thrive here, but we're going to keep you locked down for another 2 weeks for indoor dining. Doesn't make sense. And for all those who say they're anti-death, okay, we get it. We know business opening may not be right at the moment. But what you're really saying is that you don't like the fact that there's unemployment. You'll blame Trump for that. But you'll also not want them open. You don't want business open either. So which is it? How do we reduce unemployment if businesses are still closed? You don't. That's why we need to tell people at TouchCast, people at Hopin, people at other places that are making millions through investors to start up their company even more, to chip in. You have this millions of dollars? Great. What are you going to do for the community? TouchCast? How are you going to build out those teams? Who are you going to hire? I hope it's the average Joe that knows technology. I hope it's the average person who doesn't have a job right now that needs a job. And New York City, New York State, you want the economic valve open? Then reach out to these companies that are making millions in a pandemic and say, how can we work with you to get people hired? That is capitalism in the community. That is conscious capitalism. And I hope they use it well. I'm Alex Garrett. A lot more to talk about on this subject. Rehumanizing the workplace, adapting to it. Tune on to the Adapting podcast there. I'm going to have that up in just a little bit. But for now, I'm Alex Garrett. Leave those Christmas lights on, please, for those who want to see it. And don't apologize for wanting that Christmas spirit all year round. The Grinches can go leave Whoville as far as I'm concerned.